Mermaid, an autistic child's whisper breaks years of silence, a single word that ignites hope in the heart of a grieving father. But can a moment of magic stand against the ocean's fury? Picture this. Sienna, a radiant black mermaid, artist, lies motionless in a hospital bed, her life hanging by a thread after a tragic accident in the depths of an aquarium. Will love pull her back, or will tragedy strike again? Where are you listening from? Leave your city in the comments. And let us know. Do you think this is a story of joy or pain? Subscribe now to catch every development in our latest stories, and never miss what happens next. Can a heart-shaped seashell build a bridge to a new family? Can a billionaire's love defy fate? Join us on this 60-minute journey to find out how. One word can change everything. Share your predictions and let's find out. The Coral Bay Aquarium pulsed with life, a cathedral of water and light where the ocean's secrets danced behind glass. Tanks glowed with the flicker of neon tetras, the slow sway of sea anemones, and the ghostly glide of jellyfish, their tendrils trailing like whispers of forgotten dreams. The air hummed with the soft gurgle of filters and the chatter of visitors, their voices mingling with the faint echo of waves piped through hidden speakers. It was a place where time seemed to dissolve, where the boundary between land and sea blurred, and for a fleeting moment, anyone could believe in magic. At the icy heart of this underwater world was Sienna Carter, a mermaid performer whose presence was as mesmerizing as the creatures she swam among. Her deep brown skin caught the aquarium's blue-green glow, shimmering like polished obsidian, and her long, silky black hair flowed behind her, a cascade of ink that seemed to merge with the water itself. She moved with a grace that was both effortless and deliberate, her emerald and sapphire tail cutting through the main tank's depths like a comet's arc. Children pressed their noses to the glass, whispering that she was a real mermaid, and even the most cynical adults paused, wondering if maybe, just maybe, they'd glimpsed something mythical. Sienna had come to the aquarium 3 years ago, her dreams of competitive freediving shattered by a rogue current that had nearly claimed her life off the coast of Maui. The accident had left her with a scarred lung and a heart too heavy to chase gold medals, but it hadn't dimmed her love for the sea. Instead, she'd found a new purpose, slipping into a silicone tail to perform for wide-eyed crowds and tending to the aquarium's creatures with a tenderness that made her a favorite among staff. She fed the stingrays by hand, coaxed a reclusive octopus named Nimbus to unfurl its tentacles, and spent her breaks whispering to the corals as if they could hear her. Her colleagues called her the Ocean Whisperer, and the nickname stuck, not just for her skill but for the warmth that radiated from her, drawing people in like tides to the moon. On this particular Saturday morning in April, the aquarium buzzed with the energy of a weekend crowd. Families streamed through the entrance, their laughter bouncing off the curved glass walls. The spring sun filtered through skylights, casting dappled patterns on the floor that mimicked ripples on a seabed. Sienna was backstage, adjusting her tail and braiding a strand of seaweed into her hair, her fingers moving with the practiced ease of ritual. She hummed a low, lilting melody, a habit from her diving days when she'd sung to calm her nerves before plunging into the deep. Today's show was routine. 3 performances, a few tricks with bubble rings, and a wave to the kids. But Sienna approached it with the same reverence she always did. To her, every dive was a chance to share the ocean's heartbeat. As she prepared, a man stepped through the aquarium's arched entrance, his presence commanding despite the weariness etched into his features. Frederick was a tech billionaire, his name synonymous with sleek gadgets and sprawling innovation. At 38, he was strikingly handsome, with sharp blue eyes and a jawline that could cut glass, but his tailored navy suit couldn't hide the shadows beneath his gaze. Grief had carved lines into his face, softening his edges with a quiet sorrow. Beside him, clutching the hem of his jacket, was his 7-year-old daughter, Daisy, a wisp of a girl with pale skin and blonde, curls that framed her face like a halo. Her green eyes, wide and unblinking, darted across the lobby, taking in the world with an intensity that belied her silence. Daisy hadn't spoken a word to anyone in 2 years, not since her mother, Eliza, had slipped away after a sudden illness. Eliza's death had shattered their small family, and Daisy's autism, which had always shaped her world in unique ways, seemed to pull her further into a fortress of quiet. She'd stopped singing, stopped laughing, stopped reaching for her father's hand. Frederick had tried everything: therapists, specialists, quiet retreats to the mountains, but nothing had breached her walls. The aquarium was a last resort, a desperate hope born from a memory of Eliza taking Daisy to the beach, where the girl had giggled at the tickle of waves on her toes. Frederick had chosen Coral Bay because it was alive, vibrant, a place where the sea's pulse might reach the daughter he feared he was losing. They wandered through the tunnels of glass, Daisy's small sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. Frederick kept his hand hovering near her shoulder, not touching but ready, his heart twisting at the sight of her wonder. She paused at a tank of clownfish, her fingers tracing the glass as the orange fish darted through anemones. A sea turtle glided by, its ancient eyes meeting hers, and Daisy's lips parted, though no sound came. Frederick watched, his chest tight with a fragile hope. "Do you like that, sweetheart?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer, but her gaze stayed fixed, alive with a spark he hadn't seen in years. The crowd began to gather at the main tank, where a sign announced the mermaid show in 10 minutes. Frederick guided Daisy to the front row, her small frame dwarfed by the towering glass. The tank was a marvel, 50 feet deep and filled with swaying kelp, colorful corals and schools of silver fish that moved like liquid starlight. A hush fell over the audience as the lights dimmed, and a single spotlight pierced the water, illuminating a figure descending from the surface. Sienna emerged, her tail catching the light in a prism of greens and blues, her arms outstretched as if embracing the sea itself. She spun, her hair fanning out and blew a stream of bubbles that rose like tiny moons. Daisy leaned forward, her hands gripping the railing, her eyes locked on Sienna's every move. Frederick glanced at her, then back at the mermaid, his breath catching at the sight of his daughter's rapt attention. Sienna's performance was more than choreography. It was a story told in motion, a silent promise that the ocean held space for every heart. As she glided closer to the glass, her gaze swept the crowd, landing on Daisy's wide, unblinking eyes. Something stirred in Sienna, a recognition of a soul adrift, and she smiled, a beacon of warmth in the blue. The show had just begun, but in that moment, a thread of connection was woven, delicate yet unbreakable, ready to pull 3 lives toward a new shore. The main tank of the Coral Bay Aquarium loomed like a liquid cathedral, its 50-foot depths shimmering with secrets. The water glowed a deep, otherworldly blue, streaked with shafts of light that pierced the surface and danced across the coral spires below. Schools of silver fish wove through swaying kelp, their scales catching the spotlight like scattered coins, while a lone manta ray glided overhead, its wings casting fleeting shadows on the enthralled crowd. The air buzzed with anticipation, thick with the scent of salt water and the muffled hum of the tank's filters. Children clutched their parents' hands, eyes wide, as the announcer's voice crackled through the speakers, promising a mermaid's magic. In the front row, Daisy Hamilton stood motionless, her small hands gripping the cold metal railing. Her blonde curls framed a face pale as moonlight, and her green eyes, vast and unblinking, drank in the tank's depths. At 7, she carried a silence heavier than her slight frame, a fortress built from grief and the intricate wiring of her autistic mind. 2 years had passed since her mother Eliza had faded away, and with her went Daisy's voice, her laughter, her fleeting glances of connection. She hadn't spoken a word to anyone, not her father, not her teachers, not even the therapists who tried to coax her back with gentle words and colorful toys. Yet here, before the tank, something stirred in her gaze, a flicker of wonder that felt like a pulse in the dark. Beside her, Frederick Hamilton stood with the posture of a man bracing for a storm. His navy suit was immaculate, but his sharp blue eyes betrayed a weariness that no wealth could erase. At 38, he was a tech titan, his innovations shaping the world. Yet he felt powerless against his daughter's silence. He'd brought her to the aquarium on a whim, clinging to a memory of Eliza spinning Daisy in the surf, her giggles echoing like bells. Now, watching Daisy's rapt attention, Frederick's heart thudded with a fragile hope. He didn't dare speak, afraid to shatter the spell, but his hand hovered near her shoulder, a silent vow to catch her if she reached out. The lights dimmed, and a hush swept the crowd like a tide. A single spotlight flared, slicing through the water to reveal Sienna Carter, descending from the tank's surface like a vision from a sailor's tale. Her mermaid tail, a mosaic of emerald and sapphire, shimmered with every fluid twist, and her long black hair fanned out, weaving through the water like liquid night. Sienna's deep brown skin glowed under the light, her movements a dance of strength and grace, each arc of her arms and flick of her tail a note in an unspoken symphony. She spun, sending a cascade of bubbles spiraling upward, and the children gasped, their cheers muffled by the glass. Sienna had performed this show hundreds of times, yet each dive felt new, a chance to share the ocean's heartbeat with those who watched. She'd always loved the children best, their unfiltered awe, their belief that she was more than a performer in a silicone tail. As she glided through the tank, her eyes swept the crowd, catching glimpses of tiny hands waving, mouths agape. Then she saw her, a girl in the front row, small and still, her gaze not just watching but holding Sienna, as if the water were a mirror to her soul. Daisy's eyes were pools of green, fierce with an intensity that pierced Sienna's heart. She felt a tug, not pity but recognition, as if this child's silence spoke a language she understood. Sienna adjusted her routine, swimming closer to the glass, her movement slowing to match the rhythm of Daisy's unblinking stare. She looped through a coral arch, her tail brushing against a school of fish that scattered like stars, then paused, hovering just feet from the barrier. The crowd faded. It was just her and the girl. Sienna reached into the small net at her waist, her fingers closing around a heart-shaped scallop shell, its pink surface polished to a soft glow. She'd collected it months ago, a treasure she often gifted to children. But this felt different, deliberate. Holding the shell to her chest, Sienna pressed it against her heart, then extended it toward Daisy, her smile a beacon of warmth through the glass. Daisy leaned forward, her fingers tightening on the railing, her breath fogging the glass in tiny clouds. Her lips parted, and for a moment the world held its breath. Then, soft as a prayer, she whispered, "Mermaid." The word was fragile, barely audible over the crowd's murmurs, but it cut through the air like a blade of light. Frederick froze, his heart lurching. He knelt beside her, his eyes searching her face, desperate for confirmation. "Daisy, did you?" he murmured, his voice trembling. She didn't repeat it, but her gaze stayed locked on Sienna, her expression alive with something new, a spark, a bridge, a door creaking open. Sienna saw the shift, though she couldn't hear the word. The girl's eyes, once distant, now burned with connection, and Sienna's chest tightened with an emotion she couldn't name. She blew a stream of bubbles, each one catching the light like a tiny moon, and twirled away, her tail tracing a final arc before she ascended for air. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sienna's thoughts lingered on the girl, her silent intensity a melody she wanted to hear again. She surfaced backstage, her breath steady, but her mind racing, wondering what had passed between them in that fleeting moment. Frederick remained kneeling, his hand now resting lightly on Daisy's shoulder. She didn't pull away, her eyes still tracing the tank where Sienna had vanished. He felt a surge of hope, sharp and unfamiliar, like sunlight after a long winter. Daisy's word, "mermaid," echoed in his mind, a single syllable that carried the weight of years. He didn't know what it meant, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall that had separated his daughter from the world. He stood, his jaw tight with resolve, and took Daisy's hand, her fingers curling faintly around his. The show ended, but for Frederick, something was beginning, a fragile, trembling possibility that the ocean, and the woman within it, might hold the key to bringing his daughter back. The Coral Bay Aquarium's main hall buzzed with the afterglow of the mermaid show, a tapestry of laughter and chatter weaving through the humid air. The crowd dispersed like ripples, families drifting toward gift shops or glowing tanks, their voices bright with the memory of a woman who danced with the sea. Backstage, the world was quieter, a labyrinth of concrete corridors and the faint drip of water echoing from unseen pipes. The scent of chlorine hung heavy, mingling with the tang of salt water that clung to everything. Sienna Carter stood in a small changing area, her mermaid tail shed for a flowing turquoise skirt, her long black hair still damp and curling at the ends. She towel-dried it with slow, deliberate strokes, her mind lingering on the girl in the front row, whose eyes had held a story too deep for words. Sienna's heart was still racing, not from the dive, but from that fleeting moment when the girl's gaze had locked with hers through the glass. She'd felt something shift, a current stronger than any she'd faced in her diving days, pulling her toward a child whose silence seemed to speak volumes. She shook her head, smiling faintly at her sentimentality, and reached for her bag, ready to slip out for a break. But before she could, a soft knock echoed against the metal door frame, tentative yet insistent, like a heartbeat seeking permission to be heard. She turned to find a man standing in the doorway, his navy suit crisp, but his posture taut as if braced for rejection. Frederick Hamilton's blue eyes were sharp, yet softened by a vulnerability that made him seem younger than his 38 years. Beside him, half hidden behind his leg, was the girl from the show, her blonde curls framing a face pale as porcelain. Her green eyes darted to Sienna, then away, clutching the hem of Frederick's jacket with fingers that trembled faintly. Sienna's breath caught, recognizing the intensity of that gaze, now softened by uncertainty. She set the towel aside and stepped forward, her smile warm but careful, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Hi," Sienna said, her voice low and inviting. "Did you enjoy the show?" The question was for both, but her eyes lingered on the girl, sensing her presence was the heart of this visit. Frederick cleared his throat, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I'm Frederick Hamilton, and this is my daughter, Daisy. We needed to find you. What you did out there, it changed something." He paused, his jaw tightening as if wrestling with words too heavy to lift. "Daisy hasn't spoken in 2 years, not since her mother passed. But today, during your show, she said, 'mermaid.' Just one word, but it's the first we've heard from her." Sienna's eyes widened, her heart lurching with a mix of awe and humility. She crouched to Daisy's level, her skirt pooling on the concrete floor, bringing her gaze even with the girl's. "Is that true, sweetheart? Did you like the mermaid?" Daisy didn't speak, but her fingers tightened on Frederick's jacket, and her eyes met Sienna's for a fleeting moment, a spark of connection that felt like a promise. Sienna's smile deepened, not pressing for more, sensing the girl's world was a delicate balance of trust and time. Frederick watched, his chest tight with a hope he hadn't dared to feel in years. Daisy's silence had been a wall, unyielding, despite his wealth, his efforts, his love. Yet this woman, a stranger in a backstage room, had breached it with a single gesture. He took a breath, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I don't know how to thank you, Miss Sienna," she offered, rising but keeping her gaze on Daisy. "Sienna Carter, and you don't need to thank me. I'm just glad Daisy felt something. She's special, I can tell." The words landed like a balm on Frederick's frayed nerves. He hesitated, then pressed on, his tone earnest. "I'd like to invite you to dinner as a thank you. And Daisy seems to trust you. I've never seen her look at anyone the way she looked at you. Would you consider spending some time with her? Maybe a couple of hours a day? I'd pay you, of course, whatever you ask." His offer hung in the air, raw and unguarded. A father's plea wrapped in the formality of a man used to solving problems with resources. Sienna's expression softened, but she shook her head gently, her eyes never leaving Daisy. "No payment, Mr. Hamilton. If Daisy wants to hang out, I'm here. I work with kids at the aquarium's marine camp. She could join us, learn about the animals, maybe find more to say. Her voice was steady, but inside her heart raced. She'd seen children like Daisy before, their worlds locked behind invisible gates, and she knew trust was a gift earned, not bought. Frederick's shoulders relaxed, a flicker of relief crossing his face. That's more than I could have hoped for. Thank you. Daisy shifted, peeking from behind her father, her eyes now fixed on Sienna's skirt, where a faint shimmer of sequins caught the light. Sienna noticed and reached into her bag, pulling out the heart-shaped scallop shell she'd held during the show. Its pink surface gleamed, smooth as a whispered secret. Daisy, she said softly, crouching again, this is for you. It's yours now, to keep. She extended the shell, her movements slow, like offering a bird a perch. Daisy hesitated, then reached out, her small fingers brushing Sienna's as she took the shell, clutching it to her chest. Her lips curved in a faint, fleeting smile, the first Frederick had seen in years. Frederick's throat tightened, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. He wanted to speak, to pour out his gratitude, but the moment felt sacred, too fragile for words. Sienna stood, her smile a quiet promise. I'll see you at camp, Daisy. We'll find some starfish together. Daisy didn't respond, but her grip on the shell tightened, and her eyes lingered on Sienna, a silent vow of trust. Frederick took Daisy's hand, her fingers curling around his, and nodded to Sienna. We'll be there, he said, his voice rough with emotion. As they turned to leave, Sienna watched them go, the shell now a beacon in Daisy's hands. The corridor seemed to hold its breath, the drip of water a steady pulse in the silence. Sienna's heart swelled with a feeling she couldn't name, hope, perhaps, or the weight of a responsibility she hadn't sought but wouldn't refuse. She didn't know what lay ahead, but in that moment, a bond had been forged, delicate as sea foam yet strong as the tide, ready to carry them toward an uncharted shore. The Coral Bay Aquarium's marine camp room was a vibrant chaos of color and sound, a sanctuary where the ocean's wonders spilled into the lives of children. Tanks lined the walls, alive with the darting of damselfish and the lazy drift of seahorses, their tiny fins flickering like candle flames. The air smelled of brine and damp paper, mingling with the squeak of markers and the chatter of young voices. Posters of coral reefs and whale migrations plastered the walls, curling at the edges, while a table overflowed with shells, driftwood, and magnifying glasses for inspecting treasures. In this haven, Sienna Carter was a beacon, her deep, brown skin glowing under the fluorescent lights, her long black hair tied back with a scarf that shimmered like abalone. Her laughter rang out, clear and warm. As she knelt beside a boy examining a starfish, her presence a tide that lifted every child in the room. It was late April, and the camp was in full swing, a daily gathering for kids to explore the sea through crafts, lessons, and hands-on encounters. Sienna had invited Daisy Hamilton to join, and the 7-year-old girl, once locked in silence, now stood at the edge of this vibrant world, her blonde curls catching the light like sea foam. Daisy's green eyes, wide and watchful, scanned the room, her small hands clutching the heart-shaped scallop shell Sienna had given her, its pink surface worn smooth by her constant touch. Since her mother's death, Daisy's autism had deepened her withdrawal, but here, under Sienna's gentle gaze, she seemed to hover on the cusp of something new, a flower unfurling toward sunlight. Sienna moved through the room with the grace of her mermaid performances, her turquoise skirt swaying as she guided children to their tasks. She approached Daisy, who stood by a tank of clownfish, her fingers tracing the glass. "Hey, sweetheart," Sienna said, her voice soft but bright, like a melody carried on the wind. "Want to help me feed the stingrays today?" Daisy didn't speak, but her eyes flicked to Sienna, and she gave a small nod, a gesture that felt like a victory. Sienna led her to a shallow tank where stingrays glided like velvet shadows, their wings rippling against the water's surface. She handed Daisy a piece of squid, showing her how to hold it beneath the surface. When a stingray brushed Daisy's fingers, sucking the food with a gentle tug, Daisy's lips parted in a gasp, and she whispered, "Soft." The word, small but clear, pierced Sienna's heart. She grinned, crouching beside Daisy. "They are, aren't they? Like underwater clouds." Daisy nodded, her gaze fixed on the stingrays, and for the first time she giggled, a sound so delicate it seemed to float like a bubble. Sienna's chest swelled with joy, not triumph but awe, as if she'd glimpsed a hidden reef in Daisy's silent sea. Over the next hour, Daisy stayed close, her shell tucked in her pocket as she followed Sienna's lead. She pointed at a sea, slug murmuring starfish, and when Sienna corrected her gently, Daisy tried again. Slug. Each word was a pebble dropped into a still pond, sending ripples through the room. Frederick Hamilton lingered at the room's entrance, his tailored jacket draped over a chair, his blue eyes tracking his daughter's every move. He'd taken to watching the camp sessions, his tech empire momentarily forgotten as he witnessed Daisy's transformation. The girl who'd once flinched at touch now reached for Sienna's hand, her fingers brushing Sienna's as they sorted shells. Frederick's heart ached with gratitude, but something else stirred, a warmth he hadn't felt since Eliza's laughter filled their home. Sienna's patience, her ability to meet Daisy in her quiet world, was a kind of alchemy, turning silence into song. He found himself noticing the way Sienna's eyes crinkled when she laughed, the way her scarf slipped as she animatedly described a dolphin's leap. As the session neared its end, Frederick approached, his steps hesitant but deliberate. "Sienna," he said, his voice low to avoid startling Daisy, who was now at a table with crayons. "I don't know how you do it. She's talking, laughing. I haven't seen her like this since—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Sienna's smile was gentle, her eyes meeting his with understanding. "She's finding her way, Frederick. She just needed someone to listen on her terms." He nodded, swallowing hard, then added, "Can I buy you a coffee, just to talk about Daisy, about this?" Sienna hesitated, then agreed, sensing his need to connect, to share the weight of hope. They sat at a corner table, the hum of the camp fading as children trickled out. Frederick spoke of Eliza, how she'd loved the ocean, how Daisy's silence had felt like losing her twice. Sienna listened, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup, then shared a piece of her own story. Her diving accident, the brother she'd put through college with her aquarium wages. Their words wove a fragile bridge, not yet love, but a mutual recognition of resilience. Frederick felt a spark, a possibility he wasn't ready to name, but it warmed the edges of his grief. Back at the table, Daisy worked alone, her crayons moving with purpose. When Sienna returned, Daisy looked up, her eyes bright, and held out a drawing. It was simple, done in bold strokes. 2 stick figures, one with a mermaid tail, one with curls, holding hands under a heart-shaped shell. "You and me, Daisy," said, her voice soft but steady. Sienna's breath caught, her eyes stinging as she knelt beside her. "It's beautiful, Daisy. You and me, always." She hugged the girl, feeling the shell press against her through Daisy's pocket, a talisman of trust. Frederick watched, his throat tight as Daisy leaned into Sienna's embrace. The room seemed to glow, the tanks casting a soft blue light that felt like a promise. He didn't know where this path led, but for the first time in years, he believed it might lead somewhere bright. Daisy's drawing lay on the table, its heart-shaped shell a beacon, binding 3 souls in a moment of unspoken hope, ready to carry them forward on the tide. The Coral Bay Aquarium shimmered under the golden haze of a late June sunset, its glass walls reflecting the fading light, like a prism of dreams. Inside, the air buzzed with the hum of summer crowds, their voices weaving through the gurgle of tanks and the distant splash of a dolphin in its enclosure. The aquarium's heart pulsed strongest in its quieter corners, where the marine camp room now felt like a second home to Daisy Hamilton. The space was a kaleidoscope of life, tanks glowing with the darting of angelfish, tables strewn with seaweed sketches, and the faint scent of salt clinging to every surface. Sienna Carter moved through it all like a current, her deep brown skin radiant under the soft lights, her long black hair braided with a strand of blue ribbon that caught the eye like a wave's crest. Her laughter was a melody, lifting the children around her into a dance of discovery. Daisy, now a fixture at the camp, was no longer the silent shadow who'd first arrived. At 7, her blonde curls bounced as she darted between stations, her green eyes alight with a joy that seemed to reshape the room. The heart-shaped scallop, Shell, her constant companion, hung from a cord around her neck, its pink glow a talisman of trust. Her autism still shaped her world. Moments of overwhelm sent her retreating to a quiet corner. But her voice, once locked away, now spilled out in bursts. "Sienna, look," she called, holding up a hermit crab that scuttled across her palm. "It's dancing." Sienna knelt beside her, her smile as warm as sunlight on water. "It sure is, sweetheart. You're teaching it new moves." Daisy's transformation was a miracle, each word and giggle a note in a song that had been silent for 2 years. She chattered about sea slugs, her small hands mimicking their squishy glide, and begged to visit the jellyfish tank, where she'd sway her arms like their pulsing bells. When a dolphin splashed her during a feeding session, she laughed, a sound so bright it echoed in Sienna's chest like a conch's call. Sienna guided her with a patience that felt instinctive, sensing when to nudge Daisy forward and when to let her linger in her own rhythm. She braided Daisy's curls with a strand of seaweed, the girl giggling at the tickle, and taught her to hum a sailor's tune, their voices blending in a soft duet that hushed the other children into awe. Frederick Hamilton watched from the Hay camp's doorway, his tailored blazer discarded on a chair, his blue eyes soft with a wonder he hadn't known since his wife Eliza filled their home with song. His tech empire, once his anchor, felt distant as he stood here, witnessing Daisy's rebirth. Sienna was the catalyst, her warmth unlocking doors he'd feared were sealed forever. But it wasn't just gratitude that stirred in him now. He noticed the way Sienna's laughter lit the room, the way her fingers brushed Daisy's hair with a tenderness that felt like home. When she caught his eye and smiled, a spark flared in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar, like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. He began lingering after camp, his excuses thin but earnest, a question about Daisy's progress, a comment on the weather. Sienna humored him, her turquoise skirt swaying as she tidied the room, her answers laced with stories of her own. She spoke of her diving days, the thrill of chasing currents, and the ache of supporting her younger brother through college on her aquarium wages. Frederick listened, sharing fragments of Eliza's love for the sea, how she'd dreamed of sailing the Pacific with Daisy. Their conversations stretched longer, silences growing comfortable, like the pause between waves. He found himself imagining Sienna in his life, not just as Daisy's guide, but as something more, a partner, a light to guide them both. One evening, as the camp emptied and Daisy sat sketching at a table, Frederick made a decision. He stepped outside, the aquarium's glow fading behind him, and called a jeweler he trusted, a craftsman who'd designed Eliza's engagement ring. "I need something extraordinary," he said, his voice steady but thick with intent. "A ring, sapphire, heart-shaped, set in diamonds. $10 million, no less. It's for someone who's everything." He envisioned proposing at the aquarium, Daisy holding the heart-shaped shell that had started it all, her smile blessing the moment. The thought was a risk, a leap into waters he hadn't navigated since grief anchored him. But it felt right, like a tide pulling him home. Back inside, Daisy worked on a new sketch, her crayons moving with a focus that belied her age. Sienna joined her, curious, and gasped at the image. A dolphin leaping over a heart-shaped shell. 2 figures watching from the shore, one with curls, one with a braid. "That's us, isn't it?" Sienna asked, her voice soft with awe. Daisy nodded, her eyes bright. "You make the ocean sing," she said, the words clear and deliberate. Sienna's throat tightened, her fingers brushing the shell at Daisy's. "Sweet, and you make it dance, Daisy. Always." Frederick returned, catching the tail end of their exchange, his heart swelling at Daisy's words. He stood beside Sienna, their shoulders close, and felt the rhythm of their trio, a pulse of trust, of possibility. The camp room glowed, tanks casting a blue-green light that seemed to hum with life. Daisy's sketch lay between them, its dolphin a symbol of joy, its shell a promise of connection. Frederick didn't speak of the ring, not yet, but as he watched, Sienna laughed with his daughter. He knew he was falling, not into love, but toward it, a current he couldn't resist. The aquarium's heartbeat around them, steady and sure, binding three souls in a moment of unspoken hope, ready to carry them deeper still. The Coral Bay Aquarium stood defiant against the September storm, its glass walls lashed by rain that streaked like tears across the panes. Outside, the sky churned a bruised gray, thunder rumbling like a warning from the deep. Inside, the main tank glowed with an eerie calm, its 50-foot depths a sanctuary of swaying kelp and darting fish, untouched by the chaos above. The air was thick with the tang of salt water and the hum of machinery, a steady pulse that masked the storm's fury. Sienna Carter prepared for a routine dive, her mermaid tail set aside for a wetsuit, her long black hair tied tightly back. Her deep brown skin caught the dim light of the tank room, and her eyes, sharp with focus, scanned the equipment checklist clipped to her belt. This wasn't a performance. It was maintenance, a task she'd done countless times. But today, the air felt heavy, like a breath held too long. Sienna was no stranger to risk. Her free-diving days had taught her to trust her instincts, to read the ocean's moods like a lover's glance. But the aquarium's tank, for all its beauty, was a controlled beast, its currents dictated by pumps and filters. Today, she was checking a filtration unit lodged near the tank's coral structure, a maze of spires and caves where fish flitted like ghosts. She adjusted her oxygen mask, her fingers steady despite the storm's distant growl, and gave a thumbs up to Javier, her dive partner stationed at the control panel. "Ready," she said, her voice muffled but clear. Javier nodded, his face tense, and opened the hatch. Sienna slipped into the water, her body slicing through the surface with the grace of a falling star, disappearing into the blue. The tank enveloped her, its cool embrace both familiar and alien. Schools of silver fish parted around her, their scales glinting like scattered coins, and the coral loomed ahead, jagged and vibrant. She swam with purpose, her kicks propelling her toward the filter's access point, a metal grate nestled in a crevice. The water was clear, the tank's lights casting a soft glow, but a faint vibration hummed through her bones, a subtle discord in the tank's rhythm. She brushed it off, focusing on the task, her hands deftly unscrewing the grate. The filter's hum was steady, but as she probed deeper, a low groan echoed through the water, mechanical and wrong, like a beast stirring in its sleep. Without warning, the tank's current surged, a violent rush that slammed into Sienna like a wall. The pump, overtaxed by a power spike from the storm, had malfunctioned, unleashing a torrent that churned the water into chaos. Sienna's body twisted, her oxygen line tangling as she fought to stabilize. She reached for the coral to brace herself, but the current was relentless, hurling her against a jagged spire. Pain exploded in her skull, a white-hot flare that drowned her senses. Her vision blurred, the tank's glow fading to shadows, and her limbs went slack. She sank, a broken silhouette against the coral, her hair fanning out like ink in the waters. Grip. Above, Javier's heart lurched as the control panel flashed red, alarms blaring. "Sienna!" he shouted, slamming the emergency override to shut down the pump. The current slowed, but the damage was done. He radioed for help, his voice cracking, and dove into the tank with two colleagues, their fins cutting through the water. They found Sienna motionless, her body caught in a kelp strand, blood trailing from a gash on her temple. They hauled her to the surface, their breaths ragged, and laid her on the tank's platform. Paramedics stormed in, their boots echoing, on the wet concrete and worked frantically, Chest compressions, oxygen mask, a pulse too faint to trust. Sienna's face was pale, her lips blue, and the heart-shaped shell she'd worn as a pendant lay still against her chest. The ambulance tore through the storm, sirens wailing as Sienna was rushed to St. Mary's Hospital. At the aquarium, word spread like wildfire, staff gathering in stunned silence, their faces etched with fear. Frederick, Hamilton, and Daisy were at home when the call came, Javier's voice trembling through the phone. "It's Sienna. An accident. In the tank. She's critical." Frederick's blood ran cold, his hand gripping the receiver as if it could anchor him. Daisy, coloring at the kitchen table, looked up, her green eyes wide. "Sienna?" she whispered, clutching the scallop shell around her neck. Frederick knelt beside her, his voice breaking. "She's hurt, sweetheart. We need to go to her." They arrived at the hospital, the storm's rain soaking their clothes, Daisy's small hand trembling in Frederick's. The ICU waiting room was sterile, its fluorescent lights harsh against the night's darkness. Daisy curled up in a chair, her shell pressed to her lips, whispering, "Sienna, please." Frederick paced, his jaw tight, memories of Eliza's hospital bed clawing at him. He'd lost one love to illness. Now another hung in the balance, not yet named, but no less vital. "I can't lose her, too," he murmured, his voice a raw plea to no one. Nurses moved silently, their updates sparse, head trauma, coma, critical but stable. Each word was a stone, piling on Frederick's chest. Daisy's eyes, red from tears, stayed fixed on the ICU doors, as if willing Sienna to walk through. She rocked gently, her shell a lifeline, and hummed a tune Sienna had taught her, a sailor's lullaby that felt like a prayer. Frederick sat beside her, his hand on hers, feeling the weight of their shared love for the woman who'd brought them back to life. The hospital clock ticked, each second a battle, and outside the storm raged, on its fury a mirror to the chaos within. Sienna lay beyond their reach, her fate uncertain, but the bond they'd forged, fragile, fierce, unbreakable, held fast, a beacon in the dark, pleading for her to return. The ICU at St. Mary's Hospital was a sterile limbo, its walls a stark white that seemed to swallow sound. The air was heavy with the antiseptic sting of disinfectant, undercut by the rhythmic beep of monitors that measured life in pulses and breaths. Outside, the September storm had faded to a drizzle, leaving the city slick and glistening under a moonless sky. Inside, Sienna Carter lay motionless in a hospital bed, her deep brown skin pale against the crisp sheets, her long black hair splayed across the pillow like a spill of ink. A bandage covered the gash on her temple, and an oxygen mask fogged. With her shallow breaths, she was caught in a coma, her body a fragile vessel adrift between worlds, her heart beating faintly, as if listening for a call to return. Sienna's mind, though, was far from the hospital's confines. She drifted in a dreamlike ocean, a realm where the laws of physics dissolved into poetry. The water was warm, glowing with a bioluminescent shimmer, and schools of fish wove around her, their scales pulsing in colors no earthly sea could hold: amethyst, sapphire, gold. She swam without effort, her mermaid tail restored, its emerald and sapphire scales catching the light like a comet's tail. The ocean stretched boundless, its depths not dark but alive with stars, as if the night sky had sunk. To cradle her, yet a weight pressed on her chest, a tether pulling her toward something she couldn't name, a rhythm that felt like love. In this dream sea, Sienna heard echoes, Daisy's giggle, bright as bubbles rising to the surface, Frederick's voice, low and steady, a lighthouse calling through fog. She saw flashes of their faces, Daisy's green eyes wide with wonder, clutching the heart-shaped scallop shell, Frederick's jaw tight with fear, his hand reaching for hers. The images flickered like reflections on water, pulling her forward, through a coral maze that shifted with every stroke. A dolphin appeared, its sleek form circling her, and when it nudged her hand, she felt Daisy's warmth, as if the girl's spirit had taken shape. "Come back," the dolphin seemed to say, its eyes mirroring Daisy's plea. Sienna reached for it, but the current shifted, carrying her deeper, where the light grew faint and the tether strained. In the hospital, Daisy sat curled in a chair, beside Sienna's bed, her blonde curls damp from the rain, her small hands clutching the scallop shell necklace. At 7, she understood little of comas or brain trauma, but she felt the void of Sienna's absence like a tide pulling her heart. Away! She rocked gently, humming the sailor's lullaby Sienna had taught her, the notes trembling but unbroken. "Sienna, please," she whispered, her voice a thread in the sterile silence, her green eyes fixed on Sienna's still face. The shell pressed against her palm, its pink glow a lifeline, as if it could carry her words to wherever Sienna had gone. Frederick Hamilton stood by the window, his tailored suit rumpled, his blue eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights. The storm's aftermath mirrored his turmoil, streets slick with grief, skies heavy with waiting. He'd lost Eliza to a hospital bed, her hand slipping from his, and now Sienna lay in her place, her life a fragile thread. The thought was a knife, twisting deeper with each beep of the monitor. He turned to Daisy, her humming a fragile anchor, and knelt beside her, his hand covering hers. "She's strong, sweetheart," he said, his voice raw but steady. "She'll hear you." Daisy nodded, her eyes never leaving Sienna, and Frederick felt a surge of love for his daughter, whose faith refused to waver. The hospital room was a vigil, a sacred space where time stretched thin. Nurses moved like ghosts, checking charts and adjusting IVs, their updates cautious. Stable, no change, wait and see. Aquarium staff sent flowers, starfish-shaped arrangements, coral-colored blooms that crowded the room, their scent a faint echo of the sea. Javier, Sienna's dive partner, visited, his face etched with guilt, murmuring apologies Frederick waved away. "It wasn't your fault," he said, though his voice shook. The community's love was a tide, but it couldn't fill the hollow, where Sienna's laughter had been. In the dream ocean, Sienna reached a chasm, its edges lined with shells that glowed like lanterns. The tether on her chest tightened, and she heard Daisy's hum, clear now, weaving through the water like a golden thread. Frederick's voice joined it, not words but a feeling. Strength, hope, a promise to wait. The dolphin returned, nudging her toward a heart-shaped shell floating in the chasm's center, its pink surface pulsing with light. Sienna touched it, and warmth flooded her, memories of Daisy's giggles, Frederick's quiet smiles, their trios. Rhythm? "I choose you," she whispered, her voice echoing in the deep, a vow to fight her way back. In the hospital, on the 5th day, Sienna's fingers twitched, a faint flutter against the sheets. Daisy gasped, leaning forward, her shell clutched tighter. "Sienna," she whispered, her voice trembling with hope. Frederick froze, his eyes darting to the monitor, where the heart rate spiked, a subtle shift. Nurses rushed in, checking vitals, their movements swift but calm. On the 7th day, as dawn broke, painting the room in soft gold, Sienna's eyes fluttered open, their dark depths clouded but alive. Daisy cried out, scrambling onto the bed, her arms wrapping around Sienna's. "Hand, you're back!" she sobbed, her shell pressing against Sienna's palm. Frederick's breath caught, tears spilling as he took Sienna's other hand, his voice breaking. "We weren't ready to let you go." Sienna's lips curved faintly, too weak to speak, but her eyes held theirs, a lighthouse answering its call. The room seemed to breathe, the monitor's beeps a steady rhythm, the flowers' scent rising like a hymn. Sienna was back, pulled from the deep by the love that bound them, a fragile miracle born of a child's hum and a father's faith. The hospital walls stood silent, witnesses to a bond that had defied the dark, ready to carry them toward a new dawn. The recovery ward at St. Mary's Hospital was a quiet haven, its pale blue walls softened by the October sunlight that streamed through slatted blinds. The air carried a faint warmth, laced with the sterile tang of antiseptic, but it was tempered by the scent of fresh lilies sent by the Coral Bay Aquarium staff. their white petals a silent prayer for healing. Sienna Carter lay propped against pillows, her deep brown skin regaining its glow, though her eyes still held the shadow of her ordeal. Her long black hair, once splayed lifelessly, was now loosely braided, a strand of blue ribbon woven through it, a gift from a child at the aquarium's camp. She was weak, her movements slow, but her smile, when it came, was a tide of light, washing over the room with a strength that defied her fragile frame. It had been 10 days since Sienna's eyes fluttered open, pulling her back from the dream ocean that had nearly claimed her. Her recovery was a delicate dance, each step forward a victory against the head trauma that had silenced her. She could sit up now, her voice a soft rasp, her hands steady enough to hold a cup of tea. The heart-shaped scallop shell, her pendant during dives, rested on the bedside table, its pink surface catching the light like a whispered vow. Sienna's heart, though bruised, beat with a fierce gratitude for the two souls who'd tethered her to life, their presence a constant in this sterile world. Daisy Hamilton was a fixture at Sienna's bedside, her 7-year-old frame perched on a chair, blonde curls bouncing as she leaned forward with offerings of drawings. Her green eyes, once clouded by grief, sparkled with a devotion that filled the room. The scallop shell necklace around her neck swung gently as she moved, a twin to Sienna's, a symbol of their bond. Daisy's autism shaped her intensity, but her voice, now freed, spilled out in eager bursts. "Sienna, I drew a turtle," she announced, holding up a crayon sketch of a sea creature with a heart-shaped shell. "It's you, swimming again." Sienna's laugh was soft, her fingers brushing Daisy's hand. "It's perfect, sweetheart, you're my artist." Daisy's visits were a ritual, her small backpack stuffed with books about whales and dolphins, which she read aloud in a halting but earnest cadence. She'd curl up beside Sienna, her voice weaving tales of orcas leaping under starlit seas, as if her words could rebuild Sienna's strength. Each story was a gift, a thread in the tapestry of trust they'd woven, and Sienna listened with a reverence that made Daisy's eyes shine. The girl's faith was a beacon, guiding Sienna through the fog of recovery, reminding her why she'd fought to return. Frederick Hamilton was the quieter presence, his tailored suits replaced by soft sweaters, his blue eyes carrying a tenderness that softened his sharp features. He arrived daily, balancing coffee cups and a quiet resolve, his tech empire left to assistance as he prioritized this fragile hope. He'd sit by Sienna's bed, his hands clasped, watching Daisy's chatter with a gratitude that bordered on Sienna had saved his daughter, not with grand gestures but with a love that met Daisy where she was. Yet Frederick's heart held more, a longing that had grown through months of shared moments, now sharpened by the fear of losing her. He carried a weight in his pocket, a velvet box containing a $10 million sapphire ring, its heart-shaped, stone a mirror to the ocean's depths waiting for the right moment. One evening, as the ward glowed with the amber light of dusk, Daisy dozed in her chair, her latest drawing, a mermaid with Daisy's curls, clutched in her hand. Frederick set his coffee aside, his gaze settling on Sienna, who was tracing the scallop shell. With a finger, her eyes distant but warm. He took a breath, his voice low to avoid waking Daisy. "Sienna, I've been carrying something for weeks, longer than I realized. I planned it differently. Lights, the aquarium, Daisy with your shell, but life doesn't wait." He paused, his jaw tightening, then drew the velvet box from his pocket, its weight a promise. Sienna's eyes widened, her breath catching as he opened the box, revealing the sapphire ring, its diamonds sparkling like sea foam. "You've given us everything," Frederick said, his voice thick with emotion. Daisy's voice, her laughter, a family I thought I'd lost forever. And you've given me hope, love, a reason to believe again. I know it's soon, but life's too short to wait. Sienna, will you be with us always? The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded, a heart laid bare in the quiet of the ward. Sienna's eyes filled with tears, her hand trembling as she reached for his. She looked at Daisy, sleeping with her drawing, the scallop shell necklace glinting, and felt the dream ocean's warmth, the tether that had pulled her back. "Frederick," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears. "You and Daisy are my home, yes." The word was a vow, simple but profound, and Frederick's breath shuddered with relief. He slid the ring onto her finger, its sapphire catching the light like a piece of the sea, a perfect fit. Daisy stirred, her eyes blinking open, and saw the ring, her face lighting up. "Sienna's staying?" she asked, her voice bright with hope. Sienna nodded, tears spilling, and Daisy scrambled onto the bed, placing her scallop shell in Sienna's lap. "Now we're all hearts," she said, her small hand touching the ring, the shell, her necklace. Frederick laughed, a sound of joy and release, and pulled them both close, his arms a harbor for their fragile trio. The ward seemed to glow, the lily's scent rising like a hymn, the monitor's beeps a steady rhythm of life. The ring on Sienna's finger was more than a jewel. It was a promise forged in grief and hope, binding three souls in a love that had defied the dark. The hospital walls stood silent, witnesses to a moment that felt like a sunrise, ready to carry them toward a future where the ocean's song would never fade. The Pacific coast stretched before the small town of Coral Bay, its shoreline a ribbon of gold under the April sun of 2026. Waves lapped at the sand with a gentle rhythm, their foam curling like lace, while gulls wheeled overhead, their cries a sharp counterpoint to the sea's soft song. The air was crisp, scented with salt and the faint tang of seaweed, carrying the promise of spring in every breeze. On this beach, where driftwood lay scattered like the bones of ancient ships, Sienna Carter stood barefoot, her deep brown skin glowing in the sunlight, her long black hair loose and dancing in the wind. Her turquoise dress fluttered, and on her finger a sapphire ring caught the light, its heart-shaped stone a quiet vow of love. She was whole again, her strength reborn, her heart anchored by the family she'd chosen. It was a year since the storm that nearly stole her, a year since the Coral Bay Aquarium's tank had turned from sanctuary to crucible. Sienna had returned to the aquarium, not as a mermaid but as a coordinator for its outreach programs, her days filled with teaching children about the sea's wonders. Her recovery had been a slow tide, each step a testament to the love that had pulled her back. Now she stood on this beach, her laughter mingling with the waves as she watched Daisy Hamilton chase the surf, her 8-year-old energy a spark that lit the shore. Daisy's blonde curls bounced, her green eyes bright with joy, the heart-shaped, scallop shell necklace swinging as she ran. Her autism still shaped her world, but her voice, once silenced by grief, now rang out clear. "Sienna, catch me," she called, dodging a wave, her giggles a melody that warmed the air. Frederick Hamilton stood a few paces back, his navy sweater rolled at the sleeves, his blue eyes soft with a contentment he'd thought lost forever. At 39, the tech billionaire had shed the weight of his empire, delegating its demands to focus on this, his family, his heart. He watched Sienna and Daisy, their silhouettes framed against the horizon, and felt a gratitude that bordered on reverence. Sienna had given him more than Daisy's voice. She'd given him a future, a love that filled the hollow left by Eliza's passing. The sapphire ring, a $10 million promise, was a symbol, but their bond was deeper, forged in moments of trust and resilience, a rhythm they'd found together. This beach was their haven, a place they'd come to often since Sienna's discharge from the hospital. It was here months ago that Daisy had first called Sienna Mama, the word slipping out as naturally as a wave's retreat. Sienna had frozen, tears brimming, and Frederick had nodded, his smile a silent blessing. Today, they'd come to mark not an anniversary but a truth. They were a family, not by blood but by choice, their love a tide that carried them through. Daisy darted back, her sandals kicking up sand, and tugged Sienna's hand. "Let's build a castle," she said, her voice eager. Sienna knelt, her dress pooling around her, and began shaping a mound, her fingers deft as they carved turrets. "Needs a moat," she said, winking, and Daisy giggled, digging with fervor. Frederick joined them, his hands less skilled but willing, his laughter mingling with theirs as sand clung to his sweater. They worked in sync, Daisy directing with the authority of a young architect, placing a scallop shell atop the highest tower. "It's our castle," she declared, her eyes shining. "For all of us." Sienna's heart swelled, her hand brushing Daisy's curls, and she met Frederick's gaze, a silent agreement passing between them. The castle was more than sand. It was a monument to their journey, each grain a moment of hope, trust, and love. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of coral and violet, they sat on a driftwood log, Daisy nestled between them. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, its pages filled with sketches of dolphins, turtles, and mermaids. "I drew this for us," she said, opening to a new page. The image was simple but striking. 3 figures holding hands, one with curls, one with a braid, one taller, standing under a heart-shaped shell. Above them, she'd written in wobbly letters, "Family." Sienna's breath caught, her eyes stinging, and she hugged Daisy tightly. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Our family." Frederick's throat tightened, his hand finding Sienna's, the ring cool against his palm. The waves rolled in, their rhythm a heartbeat, and Daisy began to hum, the sailor's lullaby Sienna had taught her long ago. Sienna joined, her voice soft but clear, and Frederick added a low harmony, his baritone weaving through theirs. The song rose, a fragile offering to the sea, binding them in a moment that felt eternal. Daisy leaned against Sienna, her shell necklace glinting, and said, "I love you, Mama." The word was a gift, unprompted and pure, and Sienna's tears fell, her arms wrapping around Daisy. "I love you too, my girl, always." Frederick's eyes glistened, his hand squeezing Sienna's, a silent echo of the same vow. The beach stretched quiet around them, the gulls' cries fading as the sky darkened. They stood, hand in hand, and walked to the water's edge, the tide kissing their toes. Daisy splashed, her laughter a spark against the dusk, and Sienna leaned into Frederick, her head on his shoulder. "We're home," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the waves. He nodded, his arm around her, feeling the truth of it in his bones. The heart-shaped shell from the aquarium, now on a shelf in their home, was a relic of their beginning. But this moment was their future, a family found, whole and unbroken. The sea sang on, its waves a lullaby for 3 souls bound by love. Their footprints fading in the sand, but their bond enduring, a rhythm that would carry them through every tide. The horizon glowed, a promise of tomorrows, and as Daisy ran ahead, calling for them to follow, Sienna and Frederick smiled, knowing they'd found their forever in the heart of the ocean's song. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey, with Sienna, Frederick, and Daisy in the mermaid's heart. We hope their story of love, resilience, and chosen family touched your heart. What moved you most? Was it Daisy's first word, Sienna's courage, or their beachside promise? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're listening from. We'd love to hear from you. Your support means the world, so please subscribe to catch our next tale of hope and connection. Until then, keep the ocean's rhythm in your heart, and we'll meet again soon for another story that shines. Thank you, and take care.